On a winter morning in 1942, a man sat in a villa overlooking Berlin's Wannsee Lake, sipping coffee and organizing train schedules. Except these trains were carrying human beings to their deaths, and by the time he finished his coffee, he had condemned thousands more to gas chambers. He would go home that evening, kiss his wife, play with his children, and sleep soundly. This is the true face of terror. Not always the screaming sadist or wild-eyed fanatic, but the quiet functionary treating genocide as paperwork. The Nazi regime produced monsters who murdered with their own hands and those who murdered with memoranda. Some were demons you could recognize. Others looked like your accountant, your teacher, your neighbor. What follows examines the most terrifying officers of the Nazi regime, men whose names should never be forgotten because forgetting them means forgetting what humans are capable of becoming. At the very top of this grim hierarchy stands Heinrich Himmler, a man whose appearance was deceptively ordinary. With his round spectacles and weak chin, Himmler looked more like a schoolteacher than the architect of genocide. Yet this unassuming figure controlled the entire SS apparatus and bore direct responsibility for the Holocaust. Himmler's terror came not from physical brutality he personally inflicted, but from the systematic, bureaucratic machinery of death he constructed. He transformed the SS from Hitler's personal bodyguard into a state within a state, controlling concentration camps, death squads, and the Gestapo secret police. What made Himmler particularly terrifying was his calm, methodical approach to mass murder. He viewed the extermination of millions as an administrative problem to be solved efficiently. He toured death camps, observed gassings, and discussed improvements to the killing process with the detached interest of a factory manager optimizing production. His speeches to SS officers reveal a man who believed he was engaged in heroic, if unpleasant, work for the German people. He spoke of the psychological burden his men carried in murdering women and children, framing genocide as a difficult duty rather than a crime. Under his watch, approximately 6 million Jews perished, along with millions of others deemed undesirable by Nazi ideology. Reinhard Heydrich earned the nickname the Butcher of Prague, and even Hitler called him the man with the iron heart. Tall, blonde, and athletic, Heydrich embodied the Nazi racial ideal, yet his family background reportedly included Jewish ancestry, a fact that may have driven his fanatical cruelty as he sought to prove his loyalty. As Himmler's deputy and chief of the Reichssecurity main office, Heydrich controlled the Gestapo, the SD intelligence service, and the criminal police. He chaired the Wannsee Conference in January 1942, where the final solution was formally organized. The bureaucratic language of that meeting, discussing transportation logistics and killing methods as though planning a business venture, reflects Heydrich's approach to mass murder. His terror was both institutional and personal. In Czechoslovakia, where he served as Reich protector, he implemented a reign of terror so severe that Czech resistance fighters assassinated him in 1942. The reprisals for his death were characteristically brutal, including the complete destruction of the village of Lidice and the murder of all its male inhabitants. Heydrich's legacy was a blueprint for efficient, systematic genocide that continued long after his death. His cold intelligence made him perhaps more dangerous than officers who relied solely on brutality. Adolf Eichmann represents a different kind of terror, what philosopher Hannah Arendt would later call the banality of evil. A middle-ranking SS officer, Eichmann managed the logistics of the Holocaust, organizing train schedules that transported millions to their deaths. What made Eichmann terrifying was his ordinariness. He wasn't a sadist who personally tortured victims, nor a fanatical ideologue driven by passionate hatred. Instead, he was a bureaucrat concerned with efficiency, paperwork, and career advancement. He approached genocide as an organizational challenge, taking pride in his ability to coordinate complex transportation networks under difficult wartime conditions. When captured in Argentina in 1960 and tried in Israel, Eichmann presented himself as a small cog in a machine, just following orders. Yet the evidence showed he went beyond his duties, showing initiative in hunting down Jews even when military resources were desperately needed elsewhere. In 1944, as Germany was clearly losing the war, Eichmann focused on deporting Hungarian Jews, sending hundreds of thousands to Auschwitz even as the Red Army approached. His terror lay in demonstrating how ordinary people could commit extraordinary evil by fragmenting responsibility, following procedures, and focusing on technical problems rather than moral questions. He never saw the suffering he caused as real because he only saw documents, train schedules, and statistics. Josef Mengele earned the title Angel of Death at Auschwitz, where he selected arriving prisoners for immediate death or forced labor with a casual gesture of his hand. A trained physician, Mengele conducted grotesque medical experiments on prisoners, particularly twins, whom he viewed as research opportunities rather than human beings. Survivors remembered his immaculate appearance, his polished boots, his cultured manner, and the way he would whistle opera while sending thousands to the gas chambers. What made Mengele uniquely terrifying was the perversion of medical science and the doctor's healing role. He injected chemicals into children's eyes trying to change their color, performed surgeries without anesthesia, and conducted experiments that had no scientific value whatsoever. His victims included thousands of twins, many of them children, whom he would sometimes treat kindly before subjecting them to agonizing procedures. After the war, Mengele escaped to South America, living in Brazil until his death in 1979, never facing justice for his crimes. His escape and comfortable life in hiding added another dimension to his terror, demonstrating how perpetrators of atrocity could evade consequences and live peacefully while their victims' suffering echoed through generations. Amon Göth commanded the Krakow-Płaszów concentration camp and became infamous for shooting prisoners from his villa balcony as a form of mourning exercise. His depravity was captured in the film Schindler's List, though survivors insist the reality was even worse than the cinematic portrayal. Göth's terror was personal and arbitrary. He would shoot prisoners for moving too slowly, for making eye contact, or for no reason at all. He kept 2 dogs that he trained to attack and kill prisoners on command. Unlike the bureaucratic killers who maintained emotional distance from their victims, Göth seemed to enjoy the suffering he inflicted. He grew wealthy from the labor and property of his victims, living luxuriously while those under his control starved. His alcoholism and violent temper made him unpredictable, and prisoners never knew if they would survive any encounter with him. Even other Nazis found him excessive, and the SS eventually arrested him for corruption and unauthorized killings, though this was more about maintaining administrative order than any moral objection. After the war, he was tried by a Polish court and hanged in 1946, unrepentant to the end. Odilo Globoknik implemented Operation Reinhard, the plan to exterminate Polish Jews. He oversaw the construction and operation of the Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka death camps, where approximately 2 million people were murdered. Globoknik's terror came from his organizational efficiency and his ability to coordinate mass murder on an unprecedented scale. These camps served no purpose except killing, with victims typically gassed within hours of arrival. Unlike concentration camps that exploited prisoner labor, these were pure extermination facilities. Globoknik also pioneered the theft of victim property, organizing systematic looting that enriched both the Nazi state and individual perpetrators. He reported directly to Himmler and took pride in his work, seeking recognition for his efficiency. After the war, he committed suicide when captured by British forces, escaping the justice that his millions of victims never received. Rudolf Höss served as commandant of Auschwitz, the largest Nazi death camp where at least 1 million people were murdered. In his post-war autobiography, written while awaiting execution, Höss described the development of killing techniques with disturbing detachment. He experimented with different poison gases, settling on Zyklon B as the most efficient. He designed larger gas chambers and more efficient crematoriums to increase killing capacity. What emerges from his writings is a man who saw himself as a soldier doing his duty, solving technical problems without considering the moral dimension of his actions. He complained about the psychological stress on his men and the logistical challenges of disposing of so many bodies. He discussed the exhaustion of operating the camp at maximum capacity. He wrote about his family life at Auschwitz, where his children played while thousands died nearby. This disconnect between his family life and his work reveals a compartmentalization that allowed him to function. Höss was captured, tried, and hanged at Auschwitz in 1947, but his testimony and writings provide disturbing insight into the perpetrator's mindset. Oskar Dirlewanger commanded an SS penal unit that became notorious for extraordinary brutality even by Nazi standards. His unit consisted of criminals and the mentally disturbed, and Dirlewanger himself was a convicted child molester who used his SS position to continue his crimes. During the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, his unit engaged in systematic rape, torture, and murder of civilians, killing tens of thousands. Even other SS officers found his methods excessive and filed complaints. His terror came from unleashed sadism, from brutality that served no military or ideological purpose beyond satisfying violent urges. He died in Allied custody in 1945, possibly killed by Polish guards who recognized him. Christian Worth earned the title Savage Christian for his brutality in operating the Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka death camps. A former police officer, Worth pioneered gassing methods and trained other camp commanders. He was known for personally beating and shooting victims, for screaming and violence during selections, and for pushing his subordinates to maximize killing efficiency. Survivors described an atmosphere of constant terror at camps he controlled, where guards were encouraged to brutalize prisoners. He was killed by partisans in Italy in 1944, dying violently as he had lived. The terror these individuals created extended beyond their direct victims to shape how we understand human capacity for evil. They demonstrated that ordinary people could commit extraordinary atrocities, that education and culture provide no immunity to moral collapse, and that bureaucratic systems can facilitate genocide by distributing responsibility and disguising murder as administrative work. Some were sadists who enjoyed cruelty, others were careerists seeking advancement, and still others were ideologues convinced of their righteous mission. What united them was a willingness to dehumanize their victims so completely that mass murder became not just possible but routine. The machinery of terror they created was comprehensive and systematic. The Gestapo instilled fear throughout occupied territories, with informants and surveillance creating paranoia where anyone might be watching. Arbitrary arrests, torture, and executions maintained control. Concentration camps served multiple purposes: eliminating enemies, exploiting labor, and terrifying populations into submission. The death camps represented terror's ultimate expression: industrial facilities designed solely for efficient mass murder. The Einsatzgruppen mobile killing squads followed the German army eastward, shooting hundreds of thousands of Jews, Roma, and others in pits and ravines. These operations demonstrated that genocide required not just leadership but thousands of willing participants who pulled triggers, operated gas chambers, and maintained the bureaucracy of death. Understanding these figures requires confronting uncomfortable questions about human nature. How could doctors violate their healing oaths? How could educated people plan genocide over lunch? How could parents who loved their children participate in murdering other people's children? The answers are complex and disturbing. Ideological indoctrination played a role, as Nazi propaganda systematically dehumanized victims over years. Obedience to authority allowed individuals to surrender moral judgment to superiors. Career advancement motivated some to participate enthusiastically in crimes. The gradual escalation from discrimination to murder allowed people to adjust slowly to increasingly heinous acts. Group dynamics created environments where brutality became normalized and rewarded. Distance from victims, whether physical or psychological, made it easier to treat them as statistics rather than people. The post-war fates of these officers varied dramatically, adding another layer to their terror. Some, like Höss and Göth, faced trial and execution. Eichmann escaped initially but was eventually captured and tried. Mengele lived comfortably in hiding for decades. Thousands of lower-ranking perpetrators escaped justice entirely, living normal lives in Germany, South America, and elsewhere. This impunity terrified survivors and demonstrated that accountability for atrocity remains incomplete. The trials that did occur provided crucial documentation and established legal principles, but could never truly deliver justice proportional to the crimes. The legacy of Nazi terror continues to shape our world. The Holocaust prompted international law development, including the Genocide Convention and Crimes Against Humanity concept. It sparked philosophical and psychological examination of how ordinary people commit atrocity. It reminds us that civilization's veneer is thin, that democratic institutions can collapse, and that mass violence can emerge from modern, educated societies. The terror these officers created wasn't ancient history, but occurred within living memory, documented by photography and testimony, undeniable and concrete. Their terror also manifested in how they destroyed not just lives but communities, cultures, and families. Entire Jewish communities that had existed for centuries were annihilated. Family lines ended. Cultural traditions disappeared. Languages died out. The trauma they inflicted echoed through generations, affecting survivors and their descendants. They created a world where certain experiences became incommunicable, where survivors struggled to convey the reality they had endured because it exceeded normal human understanding. What made these individuals most terrifying was their humanity. They weren't monsters or aliens but people who ate dinner, loved their families, appreciated music, and then went to work organizing genocide. This ordinariness is terrifying because it means the capacity for such evil exists within human nature, not in some separate category of monster. It means that, under certain conditions, many people might act similarly. This recognition demands vigilance about political systems, ideologies, and social dynamics that enable atrocity. The ranking of who was most terrifying depends on perspective. For those who faced arbitrary execution by Göth, he was the ultimate terror. For those caught in the bureaucratic machinery managed by Eichmann, his systematic efficiency was most frightening. For Mengele's experimental victims, his perversion of medicine was uniquely horrible. For those trying to understand how genocide happens, Himmler's creation of an industrial killing system represents terror's highest expression. There is no objective measure for ranking horror on this scale, only the recognition that each represented different facets of organized evil. These officers operated within a system that required extensive support and participation. The terror they created depended on railway workers who transported victims, clerks who maintained records, factory workers who built gas chambers, and ordinary soldiers who guarded camps and shot civilians. This broad complicity means that examining individual perpetrators, while necessary, tells only part of the story. The terror was systemic, embedded in institutions and normalized through propaganda and gradual escalation. Understanding how this happened requires looking beyond individual evil to examine how societies can collectively embrace or tolerate atrocity. The final dimension of their terror lies in how they challenge our assumptions about progress and civilization. The Holocaust occurred in the heart of Europe, in the land of Goethe and Beethoven, implemented by people with advanced education in one of the world's most technologically sophisticated nations. It demonstrated that culture, education, and technological advancement provide no protection against barbarism. Indeed, technology and bureaucratic sophistication made genocide more efficient. This realization that modernity can facilitate rather than prevent atrocity remains deeply unsettling, reminding us that progress is never guaranteed and that vigilance against hatred and authoritarianism is eternally necessary. These Nazi officers created terror that continues to haunt human consciousness, representing not just historical evil but ongoing warnings about human capacity for cruelty, the fragility of civilization, and the necessity of moral courage in the face of injustice. Their legacy demands remembrance, not to glorify evil but to ensure such atrocities never recur, to honor victims by refusing to forget, and to remind each generation of its responsibility to resist dehumanization and defend human dignity. The terror they created was absolute, and understanding it remains essential to preventing its repetition.